Hello, my name is Yvonne. I'm with JK Lifestyle with Yvonne. Today we're meeting with Jonathan Steele. He's a partner at the law firm Beermann, located in Chicago, right?
That's
Okay.
right. Sorry.
He's an expert in family law. Today I wanted him to come on and talk about divorce, what it involves, what it entails, what people can expect, and sometimes not expect. How are you today, Jonathan?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for coming. Okay. I wanted to ask you, like, what are the steps that are involved in a divorce proceeding?
Yeah, so it's going to depend a little bit on, the facts of the case, whether you have kids, what kind of assets you have. The general framework is, you file the case, you issue a summons, you serve it on the other side, they appear in the case, and then the court gets to work and it has to value assets. It has to assign the assets to one of the parties or the other. It has to do the same with debt. And then if there are kids, it has to, put the kids' best interest first to figure out parenting time and decision making for the kids.
Mhm. About how long does that take to go through a divorce?
If it's, by agreement and there's little or nothing to fight about, or even if there is, but you settle it, it can be as short as a couple months. And then on the longer end, cases can take years. If you're trying to value closely held business or there's claims of non-marital assets and they require sort of extensive tracing, then the cases can drag out for 3, 4 years.
What happens if somebody is, say, a person is a homemaker? They don't work
If
outside the home.
that's fairly common. If one of the spouses makes home, is a stay-at-home mom or dad, and the other spouse works and is the breadwinner, so to speak, depending on the length of the marriage, that breadwinner is going to end up paying some form of spousal support, likely. In Illinois, it's called maintenance. In other places, it's called alimony. And here in Illinois, it's a formula. It's based on the income of the payor. So it's tied to that, as well as the duration is going to be tied to the length of the marriage.
I was just wondering, like, say, for instance, somebody gets divorced, they're a housewife, or even if they're not a housewife, but they don't make as much money as, say, the husband. If they do get alimony, does that mean they can't get remarried? If they get remarried with the alimony cut off?
Yeah, so those are different questions, and people have taken it to mean I can't get married. It certainly doesn't mean that. You can get remarried, but you do that knowing you are, in most states, giving up your right to alimony, unless that's something you contracted around when you settled your case, that remarriage wasn't a terminating event for your support. By statute, it normally is.
Okay. I guess a lot of people decide to live in sin, huh?
Sometimes people cohabitate for an extended period of time, trying to get the best of both worlds. They want, to be in a married like state and they don't want to give up their alimony.
Okay. If there are children involved and the children are under the age of 18, how does that work? Custody arrangements.
So in Illinois, we got rid of the word custody just because it was, it came with some emotional baggage for people. And we've replaced it with what we call an allocation of parental responsibilities. Um, Same sort of rows, just a different name. And what it did is it gave the court the ability to be a little bit more granular with decision making. Before, when we had custody, it was either one parent had sole custody or the parents had joint custody, and that meant they made either sole or joint decisions when it came to medical decisions, education, religion, and extracurricular. Now, with allocation of parental responsibilities, the court can be a little bit more granular and it can say, mom's a teacher, so I'm giving educational decisions to mom, but dad's a doctor, so I'm giving medical decisions to dad. And then we're going to share extracurricular. So it's a lot, it can be a little bit more nuanced like that nowadays.
Suppose something is decided when the divorce is finalized, but then say a year down the road, you wanted some type of change to take place. How would you go about modifying? Are you able to modify that previous uh, child custody arrangement?
Certain things about parenting agreements can be modified within a period of time. Um, in Illinois, we have a 2 year sort of cooling off or like let the ink dry period after the judgment is entered, and the thought being, let's let the kids acclimate and have some stability and not rock the boat the day after court. Um, that's with the caveat that there's not an emergency or a serious endangerment, then that 2 years doesn't apply. Or if it's just sort of like a minor modification, change of pickup address or something like that, you can modify within a 2 year period. Outside of that, you need to show some sort of serious endangerment. One of the parents is abusing the child. Okay, then you can come in and you can modify it short of 2 years.
What other kind of circumstances beside abuse would that be considered something that can cause for uh, custody arrangements to be changed?
I can imagine a few different scenarios. I think if one of the children developed some sort of like mental health issues and it was related to sort of like alienation or how a child was being treated, whether or not it's abuse is a different question, but there's some sort of endangerment there. Or if one of the parents gets remarried and the person that they remarry is a child predator or a sex offender or something like that. Maybe there's no abuse going on, but perhaps that person's posing an endangerment to the child.
Or drug use, or addiction issues, or something like that too?
Those could present as an endangerment. That issue is a little bit more nuanced. It sort of depends on whether or not your drug use or your alcohol abuse is in the presence of the child, or the effects of it are in the presence of the child. So the general theory is that conduct that occurs outside of the presence of the child shouldn't have a bearing on your decision making or your parenting time with the child.
Mhm. How would they calculate child support? Because I guess in different states, it's different amounts of money that are awarded.
Yeah, so we used to do just a strict percentage. If you had one child, you paid 20% of your net. If you had two, it was 28, three was 32, and it went up, and I think it capped out around 40%. Now we have compliments of the Department of Healthcare and Family Services, a chart that just, if your income falls in the guidelines, which I think is 500,000 now, then there's a chart and it says if your income is X, then your child support is Y. So they took sort of the math out of it and they do it for you. You can be creative sometimes if you exceed the income cap. But other than that, it's a chart and it's a function of both parents' income, which is also a change in the laws. It used to just be focused solely on the payor. Nowadays, it's an income shares model. So it takes into account the payee's income. And it also takes into account the parenting schedule. So if you have more than 40% of the overnights, your child support is going to be a little bit less than if you didn't.
How does divorce affect a child? A child in a household that sees that their parents going through a divorce, how would that affect them?
I think every family is a little bit different. And I like to offer some comfort to clients and with kids that are going through it and assure them that in most scenarios, two happy homes is going to be better than one contentious home. And so, sometimes you are better apart, and so sometimes you get a divorce. Whether you can stay under the same roof while the divorce is pending, that's going to be, case specific. Some people are civil, and they're able to uh, act appropriately in front of the children, and some aren't, and some have to learn that process while the case is pending. So it can be harmful, it can be detrimental, but it also can not be.
Do you think that there are some long-term effects that the child will be affected by? I mean, do they have a higher incidence of, I guess, depression, anxiety, feelings of abandonment, drug use, alcoholism? I mean, because of the divorce?
You know, the science on that says that the effects that you just described more often stem from a contentious household. So when parents try to stay together for the kids and they can't stop fighting, or they can't stop not communicating, or ignoring each other, or presenting negative energy to the children, that's going to result in more of those harmful effects that you're describing. A peaceful or amicable divorce, where the child thrives in two separate homes,
Mhm.
they might come out of that just fine. That seems to be what the data on that says.
What do you think, from your experience dealing with different clients, what do you think are the main reasons why people head toward getting a divorce?
I've seen it all, probably. I say that reluctantly because every day is new. But they all stem from a similar thread. They might present in different ways, but those are symptoms. It's usually something around communication, or a breakdown or a lack of communication, or different communication styles. And then there's, sort of infidelity, and that can be financial infidelity, or that can be cheating on your spouse in a sexual relationship. So those present pretty often. Um, as far as what I've seen, I would say those are the most common.
Mhm. It presents in what type of ways? Okay, lack of communication. What can be the result of that?
A complete breakdown in a relationship, that's sort of what it's founded upon. If you don't have some form of communication, and every couple is going to be a little bit different in how they communicate, but if you haven't found your way of communicating with your spouse, nothing's possible. Resolving conflicts not possible. Logistical day-to-day stuff isn't possible. Bills and banking and child stuff, none of that works without communication.
Do you ever have couples that may uh, fight over who spends the most time with the child? Like, say, I want to have summers with the child. I want to have holidays with the child. I want to see the child at least once a week. You may have parents that may fight over that, and that has to be decided.
Uh, I would say that's more often the case when there are kids than not. There's very often a fight about whether I have the lion's share of the parenting time, or the other side gets it, or whether the child is enrolled in my school district or the other side's school district. And then, holidays, certainly that can be a fight. Specific parenting time days is very often a fight as well.
Based on what you've seen by your clients, about how many years are people married before they head for divorce court? And I mean, it can be different. It could be a year here, but what do they say about the 7 year itch? Is
I
that
think,
is that
yeah,
have validity?
I think in the first few years is when you're most likely to get a divorce, and those rates are, I think, currently more than 50% chance that relationship is going to end in divorce. If you get past a certain threshold, it may be that 7 year period you're thinking about. Um, the numbers start to get better as far as whether or not that marriage is going to survive. But then sometimes people stay together for child-related reasons. Sometimes people stay together thinking, well, I'll stay together till the kid's in college, something like that, which is usually not a good path.
Okay. What about prenups?
They're very important tools. They help to streamline a divorce if a divorce ends up on the table for the marriage. And it just sort of takes the uncertainty out of how the case will be decided, rather than leaving your case in the hands of a judge who might have 4,000 active cases and won't give you the time to learn the intricacies of your family and your finances and your kids the way you would want them to. You're contracting what your rights are going to be in advance. You're removing any sort of questions about, like, am I getting married for the wrong reasons? Is there a financial incentive here? You can iron out things like, will somebody be entitled to maintenance or alimony if there's a divorce? Under what terms, under what conditions, under what limitations? Like if there's infidelity, does that rule it out? And then you can assign your assets that you come into the marriage with, or your non-marital property. You can clearly spell out that you leave the marriage with that non-marital property, which is normally the case anyway. But sometimes you commingle it while you're married. Sometimes it gets a little muddy. And so there's claims to it, and you can remove the uncertainty around that with a prenup.
Working with some of the divorces that you've worked with, has domestic violence or protection orders played a part in anything?
Very often. I had a sort of a niche for orders of protection and stalking no contact orders for a few years. I've done one or two this year. It's pretty common. Sometimes cases start out with an order of protection and then a divorce is filed. And sometimes there's bad motives for why people do that, to try to give themselves a leg up in a custody fight. And then, there's obviously, of course, the times where there's true abuse and people should be seeking that kind of relief. But if you're gaming the system to give yourself a leg up, in my view, that's a misuse of the protections.
What about stalking? When does that occur? Have you seen that occur?
I have, and I've represented petitioners in stalking no contact order cases. It's a similar trajectory, or it's a similar procedure to when you're seeking an order of protection. The main difference is that there doesn't need to be a domestic relationship between the two parties. To get an order of protection, there needs to be some sort of domestic relationship, whether they're spouses or they dated or they have a kid in common or some sort of familial connection between the petitioner and the respondent. In a stalking no contact order case, you don't need any specific relationship between the two. All you need is 2 or more incidents of stalking.
Does it use, why would a person stalk? That's what I don't understand. If you're not getting along and one partner is brave enough to say and honest enough to say, we need to go our separate ways, why would a person then stalk?
In that scenario, it could be, like an inability to move on. It could be a shot to someone's ego or their pride that they're being left. But stalking orders also present in cases with celebrities or high profile people where it's just truly a person that doesn't even know the petitioner, and they develop an infatuation with them. Maybe they have been following their social media for a long time, and so they feel like they know that person, and then they escalate things and they start to show up at their work or start messaging them. And so in a case like that too is what the stalking no contact order is meant to address.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Gave a lot of good information, a lot of good information. But this is Jonathan Steele, and thanks for giving your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.